from aisle to aisle. Her hands never shook. Her voice stayed silent. Her posture stayed even. But inside, a quiet switch had flipped. She didn't want trouble. But she knew she couldn't avoid confrontation forever. Not if the men kept pressing. Not if they believed she was weak. Not if they thought they could intimidate her without consequences. She hoped they would get bored. She hoped they would simply go back to their tasks and leave her alone. But hope wasn't a plan. And she had learned long ago that relying on hope alone was dangerous. As she reached the far end of the warehouse, she decided to take a moment to breathe. She set the scanner down on a crate and leaned gently against it, closing her eyes for a few seconds. She didn't drift into memory, not this time. She stayed in the present, grounding herself the way she had been taught. Control your breath. Control the moment. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something strange. The warehouse lights near the center all flickered. They didn't usually flicker. She straightened slightly, watching the way the pale white light blinked twice before settling. The building was old, but this particular row rarely had problems. A flickering light wasn't dangerous on its own. But tonight, under everything else that had happened, it felt like a subtle warning. She picked up her cart and continued working, but she stayed more alert now. Her footsteps softened naturally. Her ears picked up distant sounds, shuffling, faint voices. The low hum of machines. Then she heard something different. A slow scrape. Not metal. Not machinery. Footsteps sliding along the floor. She turned the corner, expecting to see another worker, or maybe the night supervisor doing rounds. But the aisle was empty. She waited a few seconds. The sound stopped. She stepped forward and continued moving. Her senses sharpened now, because she was scared, but because her mind slipped into the same alert mode she used to carry during training missions. She didn't like that it was happening, but she also didn't fight it. Old habits protected her. As she reached the next row, she heard a voice. "There you are." She didn't jump. She simply turned. The tall contract worker stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, acting casual again, but with an expression that said he had been looking for her. She kept her voice steady. "I'm working." He stepped into the aisle. "You keep disappearing. Hard to get a word in with you." She didn't respond. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Not close enough to reach her, but close enough to block the aisle. "You know," he started, "most people smile. Or joke. Or at least pretend to be friendly. You don't do any of that." "I'm busy," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "You really think you can brush us off all night?" "I'm not brushing anyone off. I'm working," he chuckled. "You say it like it means something." She stayed calm. "It does." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, studying her expression. "Why don't you ever react? You don't get upset. You don't get scared. You don't raise your voice. You act like nothing touches you." She didn't answer. Silence stretched between them. Not the peaceful kind. This silence felt tight, stretched thin like a line being pulled. He eventually broke it. "People who stay this calm?" He paused, shaking his head. "It means they're hiding something." She didn't break eye contact. "Or it means they want to be left alone." He smirked. "See? You talk like someone who thinks she's in control." Her voice softened. "I don't want any problems. Please let me pass." He didn't move. Instead, he took one slow step closer, not threatening, but deliberate. "You know, the others think you're just quiet, but I think there's more. I think you're trained, or something like that." Her heartbeat didn't change speed, but something inside her tightened. He held her gaze. "You move like someone who knows what to do. You don't fumble. You don't rush. You don't panic. Normal people panic." She didn't speak. He smirked again, stepping back a little. "Don't worry. I won't tell them what I think." "Not yet." She didn't react. Reacting meant giving something away. He finally stepped aside, and she walked past him, pushing her cart. The wheels squeaked again, echoing faintly. She could feel his eyes on her back, but she didn't look back. After she turned the corner, She let out a slow breath. Not relief, just focus. She needed a plan now. Not a plan to fight. A plan to avoid one. She didn't want to prove anything. She didn't want to frighten anyone. She didn't want to show a part of herself she had worked years to put behind her, but the men weren't giving her enough space to simply work. She reached the break area near the far wall and stopped to drink some water. Her hands stayed steady as she lifted the bottle. She forced her shoulders to relax. She didn't want the tension to build too high in her body as she rested for a moment. Another memory surfaced, this one from a late-night training session. Years ago, she remembered sitting on the sand at the edge of the water, her uniform soaked, her muscles throbbing, her thoughts heavy. Her instructor had sat down beside her, not speaking for a long time. Finally, he had said quietly, "Strength isn't loud. It's the quiet moments when you choose control instead of chaos." She had clung to those words ever since. She still lived by them. She finished her water, placed the bottle back on the cart, and returned to work. She kept her movements natural. She moved from aisle to aisle, scanning, lifting, checking, sorting. Her breathing stayed slow. Her mind stayed focused. Another hour passed. She almost began to believe the tension had faded, that the workers had grown tired of following her. Maybe the third one, the quiet one, had convinced the others to back down. But just as she turned into the next section, she saw all three of them standing together, waiting. They hadn't come here to joke. They hadn't come here for conversation. Their posture was different, now not relaxed, but alert. The tall one spoke first. "We've been looking for you." Her grip tightened slightly on the handle of her cart, but her expression didn't change. "I'm working." The heavy one stepped forward. "You keep saying that like it matters." The third one, the quiet one, watched her without speaking. She took a slow breath. "What do you want?" The tall one smiled, not warmly, but with a certain challenge behind it. Like he was daring her to react. "We want to understand you." "There's nothing to understand," she replied. "There is," the tall one insisted. "You act like someone who knows something we don't," the heavy one added. "You look small, but you're not scared. That doesn't make sense." She stayed calm. Fear and size aren't connected. The heavy one laughed once. "Maybe, but most people get nervous when they're outnumbered." "I'm not nervous," she said quietly. The aisle went silent. The tall man's eyes sharpened. "See? That's what I mean. You don't react like other people." She turned slightly, trying to move her cart around them, but they shifted to block her way. She spoke softly. "Please don't do this." The quiet one finally stepped forward, but his tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't aggressive either. It was curious. "Who trained you?" Her heart tightened again. He watched her carefully. "You move like someone who's been taught, someone who's seen things." She didn't answer. The heavy one frowned. "He thinks you used to be military or something. Says no normal person stays calm like you." The quiet one didn't deny it. He just kept studying her. She forced her voice to stay steady. "My past is private." The tall one crossed his arms. "Not tonight. Tonight we want answers." Her mind shifted. Instincts activated. She read the spacing between them, the placement of their feet, the distance to the nearest open aisle. She didn't want to use force. She didn't want to reveal anything. She didn't want to break the quiet life she had built. But the moment was closing in on her, leaving her fewer choices by the second. The quiet one spoke again. "Why don't you just tell us? It would make this easier." She shook her head. "I don't owe you anything," the heavy one scoffed. She's still acting like she's in charge. The tall one stepped forward. "We're not leaving until we get answers." She looked at them, each of them, slowly, steadily. Her voice was calm, very calm. "I'm going to walk past you now." The tall one smirked. "No, you're not." "Hush." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift her weight, but her eyes sharpened. Just enough for the quiet one to notice. The quiet one whispered, "She's not bluffing." The heavy one laughed. "What's she gonna do?" She didn't answer the question. She simply stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady. And in that moment, Something in her posture changed. A subtle shift. A quiet readiness. A stillness that wasn't fear but control. The tall one stepped in front of her. Reaching out to block her path, she didn't hesitate. She didn't pause. Her hand moved before his, even reached her. She shifted her weight, angled her body just slightly, and placed her hand gently but firmly in his arm, redirecting it away from her. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't violent. It was controlled, fluid, precise. The tall man blinked in surprise as his arm moved without his permission. She stepped past him effortlessly. Tour the next morning began quietly. With a pale sun rising over the rooftops and soft light slipping across her small kitchen table, she sat there in silence, holding a warm cup of tea between her palms. The events of the night before still echoed faintly in her mind, but not in the way most people would expect. She wasn't shaken or nervous. Instead, she felt a familiar stillness inside her, a feeling she used to know well, a feeling she had tried for years to live without. She took a slow sip and breathed deeply, letting the steam rise around her face. Late evening light stretched across the quiet parking lot as she stepped out of her small car and took a slow breath. The warehouse behind her hummed with the deep mechanical rumble that never fully stopped, not even at night. It was a familiar sound, one she had learned to accept over the months she had worked there. She preferred the late shift. Fewer people, fewer conversations, and fewer chances for anyone to ask questions about her past. Everyone simply knew her as someone who worked hard, stayed calm, and minded her own business. Inside the building, the light was dim in some areas and too bright in others, creating long shadows between the tall metal racks stacked with crates. She walked in with the same steady steps she always took, her mind already moving into the rhythm of her routine. Clock in, grab her scanner, check the night list, and quietly start. She wasn't looking to impress anyone. It wasn't looking for trouble either. But trouble sometimes finds the people who avoid it the most. As she made her way toward the central loading lane, she noticed a few new faces. 3 men she had seen only once before, lingering near the forklifts. They were contract workers hired for temporary help, loud and careless the night before, but she had ignored them then. Most temporary workers came and went. She didn't pay much attention unless she needed to. Tonight, though, something felt different. They kept glancing her way too often, their voices dropping to a hush whenever she walked past. She didn't respond to any of it, simply kept moving the way she always did. Gentle steps, calm expression, eyes focused. She found her station near the wall and started unpacking a new pallet. The clicking of her scanner mixed with the faint echo of crates shifting somewhere in the distance. For a moment, it felt like any other shift. Quiet, predictable, controlled. Then she felt someone behind her. She didn't jump or flinch, but she did pause. She turned slowly, expecting maybe the night supervisor or one of the regular workers. Instead, the 3 contract workers were standing there. Their expressions carried a kind of smug amusement, as if they were testing her reaction. She looked at them calmly, not saying anything at first. The tallest one spoke. "You work here alone every night? Doesn't it get scary?" His tone wasn't friendly. It wasn't curious either. It was the kind of tone someone used when they already expected the other person to feel intimidated. She answered simply, "No, it's just work." They exchanged looks and small grins. The second man, shorter and heavier, took a step closer, pretending to inspect the pallet beside her. "We saw you last night too. You're always by yourself. Doesn't anyone talk to you?" he asked. She didn't respond to the question because she knew it wasn't really a question. She just said, "I like keeping things simple." The third man chuckled under his breath. "Simple, huh?" He leaned against the crate beside her as if marking territory. "You look like you scare easy. People like you don't do so well in places like this after dark." She didn't engage. She turned back to her pallet and scanned another box. She wasn't afraid. She hadn't felt fear in a long time, but she also wasn't looking for conflict. Not if it could be avoided peacefully. But the men weren't ready to leave. The tall one stepped closer. pretending to examine the label on a nearby crate, but really just blocking her path. "We're just trying to be friendly," he said. Though everything in his voice suggested the opposite, she replied quietly. "I appreciate it, but I need to continue my work." "You got time?" the heavy one said. "We're just talking." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her expression. "I don't want any trouble." That sentence made them exchange glances again this time, with grins that grew wider, as if they had just heard something they wanted. The third man pushed off the crate and stood straighter. "Relax," he said. "We're just asking a few questions." "You're acting like we're doing something wrong." She stayed still, measuring the situation. This wasn't new to her. She had seen people use this kind of behavior to test boundaries, to press, to provoke. Usually, they expected a nervous reaction, a stutter, a tremble, step back. She didn't give them any of that. Her calm seemed to frustrate them more than fear would have. The tall one folded his arms. "You really not scared being in here alone? No one would hear anything in this part of the warehouse?" There it was. The line meant to push her into panic. To make her lose her composure, she simply said, "I'm fine." The heavy one took a deeper step into her space. "Come on, don't act tough. You're tiny. What would you even do if someone didn't take no for an answer?" She stayed silent. Not because she didn't know what she would do, she knew exactly what she would do, but because talking about it wasn't necessary. They mistook her silence for fear. The third man stepped around to her side, narrowing the space even more. She could feel the warmth of their presence, smell the faint scent of oil and sweat. She kept her breathing even, her posture relaxed but aligned. She wasn't cornered, not truly. Only people who didn't understand their own body gave in to panic. She had trained for years to stay calm in far worse situations than this, but she didn't want it to escalate. Not here, not now. Not with people who had no idea what they were playing with. "I just want to do my job," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "Please let me pass." The tall one smirked. "Why? You in a hurry to run away?" The heavy one added, "We're just bored. Night shift is long. You can talk to us for a minute." She shook her head. "I don't want to talk." The third man laughed softly. "Then what? You gonna make us move?" She looked at him calm, steady, unblinking. But she didn't say anything. Her lack of reaction seemed to irritate them even more. The heavy one leaned in, his voice dropping to a lower tone. Almost like a threat disguised as a joke, "You know. You act real confident for someone alone with 3 men. She met his eyes without hesitation. "Confidence isn't the same as being unprepared." That sentence made the tall one frown slightly, as if something in her tone didn't match her appearance. She didn't look like someone who fought. She didn't look like someone who trained. She didn't look like someone who had spent years pushing her body through challenges most people would run from, but her voice had something in it. A steadiness, a quiet certainty. The third man stepped a little closer, tilting his head as if studying her. "Where'd you learn to talk like that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly to reach for another box, quietly signaling she was done with the conversation. But as she did, the heavy man placed his hand on the crate, blocking her reach. "Hey," he said. "We're not done." She paused. That was the moment she realized they weren't going to walk away on their own. She had given them every chance to leave things peacefully, to step back, to rethink their approach. They chose not to. Her heartbeat stayed slow. Her mind settled into the familiar clarity that came whenever tension sharpened into something more direct. She didn't want a confrontation. She truly didn't, but she knew how to handle one if it came. Still, she gave them one more chance. "Move your hand," she said softly. The heavy man grinned. "Or what?" the tall man added. "You gonna call someone?" She shook her head once. "No." The third man stepped even closer. "Then what exactly do you think you're gonna do?" She didn't answer. But inside her mind, she was no longer thinking about fear or frustration. She was thinking about the angles of their bodies, the spacing of their feet, the distance to the nearest wall, the number of steps to the open aisle behind them. Old instincts she tried to bury were rising to the surface again. Not because she wanted them to, but because the situation demanded she be ready for now. She stayed calm, still, silent. The men waited for her to show fear. She didn't. The warehouse hummed. Machines clanking in the distance, unaware of the quiet storm growing in the shadows between the crates. And she knew, with a certainty she had hoped she would never need again, that something was about to change. The warehouse felt colder than before, as if the air itself sensed that something unseen had shifted. She stood still for a few seconds, letting her thoughts settle. The three men were still around, pretending to go back to their work, but their eyes kept returning to her from across the aisles. Their whispering didn't need to be understood to know what it meant. They hadn't walked away because they felt guilty. They had walked away because they believed they had shaken her, but they hadn't. She took a slow breath and returned to her pallet, lifting one box at a time, scanning each item with steady hands. Her movements were controlled, but her mind was restless. She didn't like how familiar the feeling was, a quiet warning in her chest. A calm before the storm sort of tension she knew far too well. It was the same kind of feeling she used to get during missions when the team was too quiet or the situation felt off. She didn't want her past, pushing its way into her present, but it often did in moments like this. When she first started working at the warehouse months ago, she chose it because it seemed peaceful, simple, and ordinary. It was nothing like the world she had come from. The world where her body was trained to react before her mind could process danger. The world filled with early mornings, sleepless nights, high winds, ocean drills, and the heavy weight of responsibility. She wanted to leave all of that behind, but there are some things that never fully leave. They stay quiet until needed. She kept scanning, kept breathing slowly, kept grounding herself in the present. She counted each item on the pallet, not because she needed to, but because it helped keep her mind steady. She wanted this night to pass without anything more happening. She wanted the men to grow bored and forget about her. But the warehouse was large and mostly empty at night-long aisles. Tall shadowed racks and echoing spaces that made even the smallest sound feel bigger. It wasn't the kind of place where tension disappeared easily. After a few minutes, she decided to move to the back section where she usually worked. It was quieter there and she needed distance, not out of fear, but because she understood how escalation started. She didn't want them thinking she was challenging them. She didn't want to feed the tension anymore. She grabbed the small cart beside her and began pushing it toward the rear aisles. The wheels squeaked lightly as she rolled past stacks of boxes wrapped in plastic. The dim lights cast long shadows on the concrete floor. As she turned a corner, the memories came uninvited. Not memories she wanted, but ones that rose the way smoke rises from a smoldering fire. She remembered the first day she joined the training program years ago. The early morning cold. The smell of the sea. The sound of boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. The instructors who spoke with calm authority, teaching not just skills, but discipline, mental strength, emotional control, awareness. She had been younger then, unsure of her place in the world. She remembered failing her first ocean swim. She remembered staying in the cold water until her muscles wouldn't move. She remembered almost quitting that day, but she didn't quit. She learned, she adapted, she grew stronger. Not because she wanted to be a hero, she never liked that word, but because she wanted to be capable. She wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She wanted to feel prepared. And every instructor she trained under taught her the same thing. Real strength isn't loud. Real strength is quiet, steady, patient, and controlled. A lesson she carried into every part of her life. She reached the back section and felt a small sense of relief as she stepped into the quieter aisle. It didn't solve the problem, but it allowed her mind to reset. She parked the cart and began checking the inventory list taped to the clipboard. Then she heard footsteps. Not the kind of footsteps she heard from forklifts or supervisors. These footsteps were slow, uneven, like someone walking without a purpose or pretending to be casual. She didn't react right away. She focused on the clipboard for a moment, letting the steps grow closer. She wanted to see if they would pass by or stop. They stopped. She looked up. One of the contract workers stood at the end of the aisle. leaning casually against a stack of boxes. He didn't speak at first, just watched her, head slightly tilted. "I see you came back here alone," he said. His tone was lighter than before, almost playful, but she knew better. People who wanted control often changed their tone depending on what reaction they hoped to get. She placed the clipboard on the top box and faced him. "I'm working. If you need something, you can ask." He smirked. "Relax. I'm just checking if you're okay. Earlier you looked tense." She didn't respond to the comment. Instead, she said, "I'm fine. I'd like to finish this section." He didn't move. "You're being real quiet. Makes a guy wonder what you're hiding." She stayed calm. "Nothing." He chuckled softly. "Everyone hides something." Her breathing stayed steady, but her instincts sharpened, just a little. She didn't want to talk about her past. It's not with someone like him. It's not with someone who was trying to push her buttons. So she simply said, "You should get back to your work." He raised an eyebrow. "Why? You don't want company?" Before she could answer, another pair of footsteps approached. The second worker appeared behind him, and together they blocked the exit of the aisle. They acted casual, but she saw the intention behind their posture. They weren't here for work. The second one spoke. "We were thinking maybe you owed us a conversation. Earlier, you walked away before we were done." "I didn't owe anything," she said calmly, "and I still don't." The first man smirked again. "You talk like you're in control." She didn't respond. The second one stepped closer. "You know, most people who act calm like you, they break easy once you push the right button." She kept her breathing slow. "There's no need for this. Please go." The first man crossed his arms. Or what? She didn't answer out loud, but inside, she felt the old part of her waking again. The part of her that had learned to read every movement weight, shifting from one foot to the other, the distance between bodies, the quickest route out, the safest angles, not to fight, but to stay prepared. The men watched her, waiting for a sign of fear. They didn't find any. Finally, the second man laughed under his breath. "I don't understand you. You're too calm. Anyone else would be shaking." She didn't reply. She didn't want to tell them the real reason she wasn't shaking that. After years of intense training, years of drills that demanded absolute mental control, years of situations where panic couldn't exist, she had learned to silence fear before it even appeared. But she didn't owe them that explanation, and she wouldn't give it. Eventually, the two men grew quiet, as if trying to figure out what made her so composed. Their eyes scanned her face, searching for something: fear, uncertainty, anything they could use. But she kept her expression steady and neutral. After a moment, they stepped back slightly, not far, but enough to show they weren't sure what to make of her. The first man spoke again. "All right, we'll talk later." The second man smirked. "Yeah, don't wander too far." She didn't respond. She simply watched them walk away. When they disappeared around the corner, she let out a slow breath she'd been holding. Not out of panic, but out of frustration. She didn't like this. She didn't like being the center of attention. She had chosen a quiet life for a reason. She lifted another box and focused on the task. One lift at a time, one scan at a time, one breath at a time. As she worked, her mind drifted again, not because she wanted to remember, but because the silence around her invited old memories to fill the spaces. She remembered the days when she would run before sunrise with the rest of the training group, barely able to see the ground. She remembered sand sticking to her skin, salt stinging her eyes, cold waves pushing against her legs as she carried heavy logs with the team. She remembered the instructors telling them to stay calm under stress, to focus not on fear but on technique. She had taken those lessons more seriously than most. She remembered one instructor in particular, a quiet man with a steady voice who believed calmness was more powerful than strength. He used to tell the group, "Control your breath, and you control the moment." She lived by that even now. She finished scanning the row and moved to the next pallet. The building felt quieter than before. The other regular workers were far away, busy with their separate tasks. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and machine oil. She worked for another hour without interruption. No footsteps, no voices, just the steady rhythm of her routine, but even in the calm, she felt something lingering, an unfinished conversation, a growing pressure. The men hadn't backed down. They had simply paused. Her instincts told her this wasn't over. As she turned toward the next aisle, she lifted her wrist to check the time. Her shift still had hours left. Hours in which anything could happen. She wished she could go home. She wished she could walk out the door and leave the night behind. But she wouldn't run. Running wasn't in her nature. She faced things even things she didn't want to. She finished with the last box on the cart and pushed it forward. The wheels squeaked against the floor again, echoing faintly in the quiet space. As she turned another corner, she saw something that made her stop. The third contract worker, the one who had said the least earlier, was standing near the loading exit. He wasn't pretending to work, wasn't holding any tools or boxes. He was just waiting. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't move closer. He just watched her with an unreadable expression, as if trying to piece together who she really was. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "You're not scared of us, are you?" Her voice was steady. "I don't want trouble." "That's not what I asked." She didn't look away. "No, I'm not scared." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded to himself, as if confirming a thought. "You carry yourself like someone who's seen things." She didn't respond. He continued, "The other two think you're just being stubborn." I don't think the rest of the warehouse settled into a heavy silence, the kind that made every small sound feel louder than it should be. She continued working, but the feeling in her chest never fully relaxed. She knew the night was shifting into something different, like a tide quietly moving in, slow enough to ignore but strong enough that it couldn't be stopped. She had always believed silence was a friend, a place where she could think clearly. But tonight, the silence carried something else, carried the sense of being watched. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't need to. Years of training had built a kind of awareness in her that didn't disappear with time. She could sense when eyes were following her movements. She could feel when someone's footsteps changed rhythm. She could read intent in the space between breaths, and she felt it now. Still, she kept her pace steady and natural. She placed boxes on her cart, checked the labels, scanned each item, and quietly moved. Outside, the street was calm, with only the faint sound of passing cars and early birds. For a moment, she allowed herself to pretend life was simple again. But deep down, she knew things had changed. Those men weren't going to forget what happened, and they certainly weren't going to leave things alone. She had hoped that walking away would be the end of it, that showing restraint and calm would close the situation before it grew worse. But there had been something in their faces last night, anger, embarrassment, confusion, emotions that often led people to make poor decisions. And she knew they would return. Still, she wasn't going to let fear or worry control her day. She finished her tea and stood up, stretching her shoulders as she moved around the small kitchen. She cleaned up slowly, taking her time to steady her thoughts. If they came again, she would handle it. But she also believed in giving space for things to settle on their own. Sometimes people calm down after a night to think. She wasn't counting on it, but she hoped. Eventually she got ready for work, tying her hair back and dressing in simple work clothes. She looked at herself in the mirror before stepping out. Her expression was calm, the same steady gaze she carried through life. Some would call it unreadable. Others called it strong. But to her, it was simply who she was. The drive to the warehouse was uneventful. The morning shift workers were arriving, and the busy hum of forklifts and chatter filled the air as she walked through the large loading doors. She clocked in quietly and moved to her station. A few coworkers waved to her, offering casual greetings. She returned them with a small nod and a gentle smile. She liked these people. They were hardworking, respectful, and focused on their tasks. Most didn't know anything about her past, and she preferred it that way. She enjoyed being just another person trying to earn an honest living. But as she reached her section, she noticed something different, whispers floating through the aisles. People were talking quietly, glancing toward the break room before quickly turning away. There was a tension in the air. She placed her bag down and approached one of the older workers who had always been kind to her. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He frowned slightly and leaned in, lowering his voice. Those 3 contract workers from last night there in the break room arguing with the supervisor. Something about wanting access to the night shift again. She felt the faintest shift inside her. They weren't scheduled? No, the man replied. They weren't supposed to be back until next week. But they showed up early this morning saying they had business here. She nodded once in understanding. It wasn't a surprise, not really. If anything, it confirmed what she already knew. They hadn't let things go. Still, she kept her voice even. Did they say why? The older worker shrugged. They're claiming some equipment was left behind last night, but no one believes that. Something's off. Just stay away from them today. She nodded again. I will. The supervisor's voice echoed from the break room, frustrated, firm. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. The argument wasn't going well. After a few more minutes, the 3 men stormed out of the room, their steps heavy against the floor. Their expressions were tight with irritation, eyes scanning the warehouse. She didn't hide. She didn't lower her head or walk away. She remained at her station, calmly opening a new box of inventory. They spotted her almost immediately. The tall one was the first to walk her way. His expression was colder than the night before, but his eyes gave away something deeper, a bruised pride. The other 2 followed behind him, moving with the heavy steps of people who felt wronged. She continued working, not out of defiance, because she refused to let them control her behavior. As they approached, the tall man spoke first. Funny seeing you here this early. It's my shift, she said calmly. The heavy one crossed his arms. Yeah, well, we thought we'd come talk. Last night ended weird. She kept her tone gentle. There's nothing to talk about. The third man stepped closer. I think there is. You made us look stupid. She paused her work, not because she was alarmed, but because she needed to be fully present. She turned to face them. I didn't do anything, she said simply. They exchanged irritated glances. The tall one leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so others wouldn't hear. You embarrassed us. She shook her head. You embarrassed yourselves. That line hit harder than she expected. The heavy man's jaw tightened. The third one shifted his weight as if preparing to say something more forceful. Before they could, the supervisor walked up behind them. What's going on here? He asked firmly. The men straightened up quickly, pretending nothing was wrong. Just talking, the tall one said. The supervisor looked at her. Is everything okay? She nodded gently, yes, I'm fine. The supervisor gave the men a firm look. You 3 need to leave the floor. You're not cleared to be here today. The third man muttered something under his breath, but they didn't argue. They walked away slowly, each step heavy with frustration. The supervisor stayed near her for a moment. If they bother you again, let me know. They're already causing problems. I'll be all right, she said softly. He gave a short nod and walked away. For the next few hours, the warehouse returned to its usual rhythm. Forklifts beeped in the distance, workers moved crates, and the steady hum filled the space again. She stayed focused, keeping her breathing steady. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't search for them. She simply worked. But she knew they hadn't left. Sometimes she could feel their eyes from across the room. Not constantly, but enough to let her know they were waiting for a moment when no one was watching. Waiting for privacy, she stayed aware, without appearing tense. Every movement she made was deliberate, calm, but prepared. By midday, she moved toward the storage area to collect new labels. The hallway leading there was quieter, with fewer workers passing through. She walked at a steady pace, not rushing, not slowing down. As she reached the end of the hall, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She placed the box of labels on the counter and took a breath before glancing over her shoulder. The 3 men stood there. The hallway was empty. The air felt still. The tall one smirked faintly. Supervisor can't save you now. She didn't let her heartbeat change. She simply said, I don't need anyone to save me. The heavy one stepped forward. You think you're tough. You think last night meant something. Her voice remained level. You made a mistake last night. You're making another one now. The third man scoffed. You talk like you know something we don't. She turned fully toward them, her posture relaxed but grounded. I asked you to stop last night. I'm asking again. Don't do this. He didn't listen. The tall man moved first, stepping closer to her, trying to crowd her space again. But this time, she didn't step back. She didn't allow the same mistake to repeat. "I don't want trouble," she said softly. "But I won't let you corner me again." The heavy one laughed quietly. "Corner you? We're just talking." "No," she replied. "You're trying to intimidate me?" The third man smirked. "And it's not working. That's what makes this fun." She felt a small shift inside. Her not anger, not fear, but a calm decision. They weren't going to walk away. They wouldn't stop until they understood something they never expected. She breathed once, steady. "When I asked you to move last night," she said slowly, "I was being polite. I was trying to avoid something you don't want." The tall man frowned. "What exactly is that?" She met his eyes, her voice quiet but clear. "You don't know who you're dealing with." They exchanged confused glances, not taking her seriously. She continued, "You think I scare easy, but the truth is, I'm trained to handle far worse situations than this." The heavy one raised an eyebrow. "Trained? Trained how?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look dramatic. She simply spoke the truth. "I served." Not the quiet that followed her words felt heavy, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. The three men just stared at her, their expressions shifting between disbelief and irritation. They'd expected her to break, to panic, to show weakness. Instead, she was standing calmly, speaking evenly, and warning them in a way that didn't sound like a threat, but something much more real. She didn't look like someone who trained with elite forces. She didn't brag. She didn't raise her voice. There was nothing dramatic about her. And yet the confidence in her tone felt controlled, practiced, earned. The tall man scoffed first. "You? Navy training? Come on." She nodded once. "I didn't say it to impress you. I said it because you need to understand you're pushing a situation you don't want." The heavy one chuckled, but there was a slight shake in his voice. "So what? You're some kind of fighter?" She didn't respond to the mockery. Instead, she spoke plainly. "I learned to stay calm in chaos. I learned how to protect myself. And I learned when not to fight." The third man's smirk wavered. Something in her expression finally reached him, even if just a little. "Why didn't you say anything last night then?" he asked. "Because I didn't want things to go there," she said softly. "I still don't." The hallway fell silent again. A faint beeping sound echoed in the distance from a forklift reversing somewhere far away, but here, everything felt still. "I'm giving you one more chance," she said gently. "Walk away. Let this end." For a moment, it seemed like they might. The tall man shifted his weight, uncertain. The heavy one looked back toward the main floor, as if debating what to do. But pride is a difficult thing to let go of, especially when it feels bruised. The third man stepped forward, not aggressively, but with a stubborn tilt to his chin. "Maybe you trained. Maybe you didn't, but you can't just talk like you're above us." She shook her head. "I'm not above anyone. I'm just trying to avoid something unnecessary." The tall one narrowed his eyes. "So you think we're the problem?" She met his gaze calmly. "Yes, right now you are." The heavy one's face tightened. "You think you can just stand there and talk like that?" She didn't step back. "I'm telling you the truth." Their frustration grew again, simmering in their posture. But this time, their confidence wavered. Something in her tone had created doubt. She wasn't bluffing, and they sensed it. Before any of them could respond, footsteps echoed from around the corner. The supervisor appeared, holding a clipboard and looking surprised to find them all standing there. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes moving between them. The tall man straightened immediately. "Nothing. Just talking." The supervisor looked at her. "Is that true?" She gave a small nod. "We're fine." But the supervisor wasn't convinced. He had been working long enough to read people, and he saw the tension in the men's shoulders. "You three shouldn't be back here," he said firmly. "You're causing too many issues," the heavy one muttered. "We weren't doing anything." "Not the point," the supervisor said. "Leave the building now." They hesitated, but eventually followed the order. As they walked away, The tall man glanced back at her one last time. His expression wasn't anger anymore. It was something close to confusion and a hint of respect. Once they were gone, the supervisor turned to her. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm all right," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, unsure. "You don't have to handle this alone. If they bother you again, I'll report them to the main office." "Thank you," she said with a gentle nod. He left the hallway, shaking his head as he walked. She took a quiet breath and picked up the box of labels she had come for originally. But even as she returned to her section, she knew the situation wasn't finished. Those men hadn't expected her calmness, her warning, or her certainty. They would talk among themselves. They would question everything she said. And maybe after thinking long enough, they would understand. But she had no control over that part. By evening, the warehouse slowly emptied. Workers signed out, laughter and chatter echoing as they headed home. She stayed behind for a bit longer, tidying her area, finishing the last set of tasks, and preparing for the next day when she finally stepped into the cool air outside. The sun was dipping low, casting warm gold across the parking lot. Everything felt peaceful again. The sky was calm, the breeze soft, and she allowed her shoulders to relax. She walked to her car, feeling the quiet settle around her. She reached for the door, then paused. A figure stepped out from behind a nearby truck. Her senses sharpened instantly. Though her face didn't show it, it was the tall man. For a moment, neither of them moved. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only a few distant engines hummed from the far side. He lifted both hands, palms facing her, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. She didn't open her car door yet. "Then why are you here?" He took a slow step forward. Not close enough to crowd her, just enough to show he wasn't hiding anything. His face looked different now. Less defensive. Less angry. More unsure. "I talked to the others," he said quietly. "We argued for a while, but you got in my head." She waited, watching him carefully. He continued, "Last night, we were stupid. We thought you were just some quiet person we could push around. But today, when you talked about being trained," he shook his head, "you weren't bragging. You weren't trying to scare us. You were just honest." She nodded once, but didn't say anything yet. He took another slow breath. "Look, I don't know what you've seen or what you've been through, but I know one thing: none of us should have treated you the way we did, and I shouldn't have let it go that far." She studied his face. He seemed sincere, not completely comfortable, but sincere. "I wasn't trying to challenge you," she said softly. "I just wanted the situation to end without anyone getting hurt."
"I know,"
she said. "And that's what hit me. You could have embarrassed us worse. You could have yelled or made a scene, but you didn't. You stayed calm. That honestly made me think." Small breeze passed between them. He looked down for a moment, hands still open. "So I came out here to say sorry. Not just for me, but for the other two too. We won't bother you again, ever." She nodded gently. "Thank you." He looked relieved, though still slightly embarrassed. "One more thing. If you really trained the way you say," she tilted her head slightly. "Yes. Then I just want to say, respect." A small smile touched her lips. "Respect goes both ways." He returned a faint smile before stepping back. "We'll stay out of your way. Promise." She gave him a simple nod. He walked off toward the far side of the lot where the other two men waited near a car. They looked at her once, and this time there was no anger in their expressions. Just quiet acknowledgement. She watched them leave, then opened her car door and sat inside. She let the silence settle before letting out a soft breath. She had been holding for the first time all day. Not fear relief. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to prove anything. She just wanted peace. And today, she had managed to guide things toward that direction without letting old instincts take over as she drove home. The sky shifting into soft shades of pink and blue. She felt something warm settle inside her. Reminder that strength didn't always come from force. Sometimes it came from restraint, from calm, from speaking the truth, even when others pushed against it. She had once lived a life built on discipline, control, and readiness for danger. She had stepped away from that world to create a quieter life, a life filled with work, simple routines, and peace, and this week had reminded her of something important. She hadn't lost who she was. She had simply learned a new way to use it when she reached her home. She parked, stepped out, and looked up at the gentle evening sky. The wind was cool, brushing against her skin, carrying with it a sense of closure. Tomorrow would be another normal day, another shift, another quiet morning, and she was ready. Not because of her past, but because she understood herself, her strength, her limits, and her peace. And that, she realized, was the most powerful thing she carried with her. She walked inside, closing the door softly behind her. Leaving the last trace of the long week outside, her life was calm again, exactly how she wanted it.